Hi everyone, welcome to this latest episode of VFX Notes. I'm Ian Fales from Befores and Afters, and as always, I'm joined by Hugo Guerra from Hugo's Desk. How you going, Hugo?
Hey Ian, how are you doing? Everything is good, yeah. Everything is top-notch here.
Oh, that's good. Well, we're still in lockdown in Sydney as my crazy beard and hair are revealing. I apologise again for it. I think it's like day 92 or something of
God.
Sydney.
I think
lockdown.
You look great. I told you that before. I think you look great. I think you look like an elder speaker, like he knows everything. I like that.
We're the same age, aren't we, Hugo?
Yes.
Come on.
But I don't have any beard. I can't grow a beard. That's the thing. I will not try. My wife doesn't like that, so.
Hugo, what's been happening since we last caught up?
So I've been busy with a lot of things on my online course, on my Nuke course. I'm also gearing up for the View conference. I'm gonna I'm gonna speak there. So I'm doing my workshops and my presentations for that festival. It's gonna be great. I'm gonna finally leave my house. I haven't got into a plane in 2 years now. So almost 2 years. So that's going to be special. But yeah, I've been just busy. I've also been busy with the podcast I'm doing with Anna. We already have 3 episodes done. So we're going to launch soon. We're just trying to get 5 in the belt, in the can, so that we can kind of start it with a few of them. But yeah, it's just been busy over here. And it's nice, London is open, and I went this weekend to a jazz festival, to a jazz concert, and it was packed to the bone. Even on the tube, I was like this, I was so packed like a sardine. I haven't felt like that in a year and a half. It didn't feel good though, but it's better than what we had, So it's kind of going back to normal over here, for sure,
Oh, good. Yes, I'm also doing some things at the View conference, which is really cool. That's coming up later in October. I've also been getting issue 3 of Befores and Afters ready.
Yes.
Here's a really
small
sneak peek of, but that's all you're getting.
Oh my god. I saw Sid.
Oh, I just bumped Godzilla. Sorry.
That is amazing. That's definitely going to stay on the show. But yeah, I saw, looked like some kind of...
Sorry. I'm sorry.
That is amazing.
Let's just...
I did saw a little bit of a spandex suit there. I did notice it. It was there.
Maybe.
Maybe. We'll see. It looks great. Let's go for it. I'm really looking forward to reading the first one.
Okay, Hugo, today we're doing something a bit different. We're sort of concentrating really on just one thing, which I think is kind of cool.
Yeah.
And what we're talking about today is basically an appreciation of the filmmaker David Fincher and invisible effects.
Yeah.
Now, how did we get here? I feel like we had watched a few films, both of us separately, recently, and really admired, amongst some of the big, huge spectacle visual effects, we'd also admired some more invisible effects work, right?
Yeah. I feel like I'm sure that we're going to miss some stuff here, and I'm sure there were other productions that were invisible visual effects. But I feel like David Fincher has been on this kind of career. Well, first of all, it's one of my favorite directors. I really like his work, and I think his work is pretty much, for me personally, almost like a Stanley Kubrick level of filmmaking. He's like a master of his crafts, and he has for decades now been really involved with very heavy visual effects on all his films, even going back as Fight Club, which has a lot of visual effects as well. But I really wanted to focus the conversation on the work he's been now doing for the last 15 years with very much using visual effects for the storytelling almost, and I'm talking about, first of all, with Zodiac, with that film, which is 14 years old now. It's from 2007. And I feel, for me, my personal view is that that's like a turning point film on both his career, but also on the visual effects use of films. Because on that film, it's all seamless. And that film could not exist without visual effects. And it's really interesting because most people might not even know that there are visual effects involved. And that's why I think it's an interesting discussion. And I know it's quaint because now everything is invisible, but not in 2007. You know what I mean? Like yeah, that's the thing.
Yeah, you're right. And obviously, his big films like Alien 3 and Fight Club and Panic Room, they use visual effects very differently. Maybe Fight Club and Panic Room, people might say, well, they're kind of invisible effects too. I feel like they have moments which are clearly visual effects shots, impossible camera moves, and shots that absolutely help the storytelling. And I am just in love with Fight Club's work, and actually I love the stuff in Panic Room too. But I think you're right. What we're highlighting here is a film like Zodiac that if you knew nothing about visual effects, you would just assume they somehow went and shot this film in the late 60s, 70s in San Francisco. Or, you know, found ways to shoot it. But in fact, David Fincher's used visual effects in an extensive way, right?
Yeah, that's right. This film is literally, every shot is literally almost a visual effects. There's of course a lot of sets, you know, like the newspaper headquarters, that's a set, of course. Everything, there's a lot of sets as well, a lot of locations. He even tried to film on the actual locations where the crime scene went. But the attention to detail here is really, I think it's probably one of the most impressive films from David Fincher, because you went back to the police records, you went back to the evidence and the production design. They actually produced absolute replicas. They are trying to make it exactly like the original, to a point where they're replicating the evidence photos from the police, you know, which I think it's really impressive. And of course, you should all go and watch the Blu-ray. Like this Blu-ray, the director's cut version, and like most David Fincher Blu-rays, they're usually workshops of filmmaking. And this one has like a 2-hour documentary about the making of it. The same with other films he has as well. And he talks a lot about it, like that. Yes, they could have done a set. Yes, they could have done this. They could have done that. But the problem is San Francisco has changed so much. Like San Francisco is so different now, not only because of the earthquake, especially like some bridges went down, and the whole Bay Area is all different because of the earthquake, like the earthquake in the 80s, and also like buildings have went down, buildings have been up, facades are different, and also not only that, but the production had another problem. A lot of locations didn't allow them to film there. That was the other problem they had. So there was no other way. The only way was to do it in visual effects. And I think that's really... I know now it's very normal, but not at the time, I think, you know.
I feel like... Yes, it's funny to harp on about it, isn't it? Because basically we're saying it had to be done with virtual sets and set extensions and total recreations of 60s, 70s San Francisco. And, you know, otherwise the audience would be like, oh, but I can see a modernization of the city there, or I can see some modern artifact. And, you know, because they had the tools, I suppose, and let's face it, Fincher knows visual effects. I mean, he did work at ILM. He did a million music videos. He also is a veteran of Panic Room, Fight Club, Alien 3. He knows what he's doing. And by this stage, he'd developed sort of a close working relationship with Digital Domain, in particular, as well as other studios. And, you know, he just knew the tools, knew what was possible, and used it to full advantage to help tell his story here.
It's really funny that you're saying that, because I also think this is a turning point for a particular piece of software that we sometimes talk about on this podcast, and also that I'm very well known for, which is Nuke. And it's funny to think about, because this is 2007. This is just the point where Nuke was still being sold by Digital Domain as D2 software. They were still selling version 4 and version 4.5. And then, of course, Foundry bought it, and then they launched 4.7. This was just on that peak, like 2007, 2008. It was just the turning point. And if you go through Cinefex magazine for the Zodiac, for the 2007 edition, it's so funny where you just see advertisements, full-page advertisements for Nuke all the time, and every single advertisement is Zodiac, 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 Zodiac. And I think the turning point was the capacity to do full recreation projection systems with matte painting. Because yes, they did a really big stink with Digital Domain, but also with Matte World as well at the time. And they really, I think this film became kind of the pinnacle of projection systems with matte painting. Put in some cards with blue screen and green screen people. I remember this like it was yesterday. I was still living in Sweden, I was still living in Sweden in 2007, and I remember opening the Cinefx, and I was using Shake at the time, and I looked at this thing with the projection system, the geometry, and then I looked at the behind the scenes of Zodiac, and I was like, what is this? Nuke, what is this thing? And it was it was like science fiction. You could project, and you can have a camera, and you can have 3D in it, and it was like, it made Shake look like a toy, it made it so ancient, if you think about it, to the technology. And it's funny how this film is in here, and it became like it almost became an advertisement for Nuke at the time. And then, of course, Apple killed Shake, and then Nuke became dominant. And I think then Digital Domain made a huge career out of using Nuke for all these projections. And I think it's not only a turning point for invisible visual effects, but also a turning point for Nuke as well. I just wanted to mention that because also, I know Foundry is now celebrating the 25th anniversary, and they're all talking about these things. And also, like, it's funny, Nuke shows up on a lot of the making ofs, a lot of the documentaries on the Blu-ray. You see Nuke on the screens, and you see them using Nuke, and it's really, really interesting.
I mean, by the time they must have been working on the film in 2005, 2006, perhaps, Nuke had a 10-year history at Digital Domain, and they had introduced a 3D system into Nuke relatively early.
But no one knew about it.
I'll put a link in the show notes. Sorry, go ahead.
That's the thing. But people didn't know about it. It wasn't public domain.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, that's when I started seeing these articles on Cinefx and these publicity pages. That's when I saw it, and I thought, wow, this software does this? Because, it was just in-house to DD. No one really knew how powerful this thing was,
I suppose you could say it was DD's secret weapon for a little while.
Yeah, it was.
And then, they did want to commercialize it. But you're right. It as we said before, it's crazy to think that you couldn't really do camera moves in a normal visual effects shot like this, a digital one anyway. And, that's what these reprojections are all about, and having a 3D system in Nuke. Meant they never really had any limitations.
No, and there's another thing also. I don't want to just drag this conversation just to Nuke, but there's another thing as well that you see on the behind the scenes, the making ofs, and I also saw on those pages, and that's what really caught my attention, which was the use of AOVs and shaders and multipass compositing in EXR, because obviously by this time Nuke already used EXR to extent, and they had limitations. They can only do 64 channels, but they could load up multiple channels at the same time, which is still the only thing that, that's still the thing that Nuke is best known for. No other software can do that, even to this day. And when I watched those things and saw the subsurface scattering pass, and I saw the specular pass, and I saw the blood splatter, and all these different layers and all these different AOVs, and saw the potential of it, that's when for me, it was a turning point, and that's when I started learning Nuke right away, and I've been using Nuke ever since 2007. Exactly that year was when I started using it. Those are turning points, I think, and I don't mean to disrespect all the other softwares that we use, because I know Shake was used as well. I know Flame was used as well. Didn't mean to disrespect any of them, but it kind of felt like Nuke was very upfront there, and I think you're right. I think maybe D2 was trying to sell it, and that's why they were pushing it so much in these articles, and also pushing it,
Yeah, there was an era of companies developing their own VFX software and feeling like they could commercialize it. This was that era, even just before this. Hugo, I reckon we should talk about some of the shots in Zodiac, of course.
Yeah.
I want to talk about the environment work, which tended to be like street level environment work. Tended to be shots filmed on streets with blue screens present. Very dark, very noir. This is fitting into the storytelling.
Yeah.
And that's part of what we're talking about, right? This isn't a comic book movie. This is street level scenes that needed a certain kind of San Francisco in the background.
Yeah. It's like David Fincher says
those were great shots, weren't they?
Yeah, it's like David Fincher says on all the commentaries. This is just a film bot, a bunch of people talking in a room, and it's like, and it's just a bunch of people watching things and talking on the phone. And it's true, like the film is not very spectacular. It doesn't have any spectacular stuff, but what you're referring to is the only time we actually see the police doing forensics, when they're at nighttime and they're on this street corner, which they weren't allowed to film there. That's why they had to kind of do it in blue screen. And it's funny, this entire thing kind of started as, you know, some dolly shots and also some static tripod shots, like on sticks. But then David Fincher kind of decided, no, we need to go handheld on here because we need to kind of feel the tension and we need to feel that they are discovering all the things. And this is the only time we're actually on set with the police doing a crime investigation. So it's so funny because they talk about this on the commentary where they call DD, you know, and David Fincher kind of tells them, you know, like talks to Eric, the VFX supervisor, and tells them like, okay, I've decided to do all these shots on handheld. Is that okay? And David Fincher is saying, like, then there was a huge silence on the phone, and you couldn't hear anything. And then suddenly, like 10 seconds later, he said, that's okay. You just hear that. And they were so like destroyed by that. Like, oh my God, this is now all a tracking shot everywhere. But yeah, you're right. Like this shot includes an entire build of the street, which is done with projections in 3D. We have also full CG bikes, police cars, fire trucks on the background. We also have like moving blue screens because obviously the blue screen was too big we couldn't like block the whole street. So we have like a bunch of grips like moving the blue screen at the same time as Mark Ruffalo is walking down the street. And it's still to this day, I watched it yesterday, it's seamless. It's like amazing work to a level of CG. And remember, fellas, this is 14 years old, this film, you know, and we're talking about like a completely photoreal 2K scan because this film was broadcasted in 2K. It was on the cinemas in 2K. That is not an easy thing to do in 2007, to do a 2K photoreal CG heavy blue screen kind of thing like this, you know. That shot is mind blowing. Those shots, it's an entire sequence, like 5 minutes long. It's really big, the sequence.
Yeah, it possibly benefits from being at night with haze, and with, you know, you're really concentrating on the characters. You're not concentrating on the background. Yeah, but the background does add clearly to the storytelling, you know, because of the, you know, the nighttime, we're investigating murder. There's a mysterious, you know, feeling to it all, but you're not looking at the CG fire trucks or motorcycles. No, not at all. Whereas in like a Marvel film, you would be. So it does suit the kind of replacement and environment work.
And I think
it's amazing.
I think also like the attention to detail, like David Fincher always does, but this time they really went deep into the photos of the crime scene, and to a point that they talked with everyone that was still alive. They talked with, and which was a real big thing that David Fincher wanted to make sure they could. Like they interviewed everyone that was still alive from this time. And then they showed these shots and they showed these replicas, and most of the police officers that were still alive, they looked at it and they thought like, wow, this is like exactly like it was on that night. And you can't get a better compliment than that, can you? Like, and that's why I wanted to talk about this, because this, for me, I had a lot of friends that were not involved in visual effects, and I remember having these conversations with people and people not believing me that this was visual effects. They were like, oh, what do you mean? What are you talking about? Like, there's just a bunch of people on the street. And no one noticed it. Like, a lot of people didn't even know until later on we had breakdowns, and later on we had articles, and we had, like, photos of the set. A lot of people probably still to this day don't know. And it's really a testament to the amazing artistry of these people, of these artists from Digital Domain and from Matt World. This was like on the top of their game, because the softwares were into. We didn't even have all the softwares we have now. Like I find it fascinating, and it's really, really amazing. And you're right, like David Fincher really knows his stuff. You can see it on the commentary. He talks about shake, he talks about flame, he's dealt with flame as well. Like he knows what he can do. And I think that's where having a director that actually has done it before and having a director that knows exactly the process makes it so much easier, because when he's filming it, he knows that this is possible. He knows that because, okay, I can do this, I can track this, I can put a marker there, I probably have to do a second pass, I have to do a clean plate, he knows that he has to give time for the VFX to do the HDRs and to do the measurements, and that's why it turns out so good, I think, because he has a full knowledge of that,
Yeah, and I think the knowledge, just like any good filmmaker, it works here because he's using visual effects to actually probably make some shooting more efficient, right?
Yeah.
For example, in the murder scenes, that felt like shooting those without blood in general was a way of avoiding multiple takes on resets. Gave the most flexible kind of slow-mo blood spurt possible. And I'm sure it had been done before, but here, as we keep saying, you could just have thought it was a makeup effect or a practical effect.
Yeah.
And there is some of that too.
Yeah.
But yeah, those murder scenes, maybe the car one we could talk about, Hugo,
the first one,
crazy, right?
The first one, and also the taxi driver when he gets shot from the back. So what everyone has to understand is David Fincher is a very he's like a Kubrickian director. He's a bit like Stanley Kubrick. Like, he likes a lot of takes. He does. Like, and it's funny, like, when you're watching the behind the scenes, Jack Gyllenhaal is always like joking around with this. He's like making bets with the crew to see how many takes they're gonna do. Like, there's a part of the documentary, they're like, I bet it's gonna be 20 takes, and actually he lost the bet. It was 37. So, and this was just to drop a book. It was a book to drop on the seat, and they did 37 takes of that. So David Fincher is known for this. He's known for long takes. I can like it and also not like it. I can understand that 37 takes for one single thing is ridiculous, but also I understand his point of view. He does speak a lot about that on interviews, on the behind the scenes, where he talks about, like, okay, we spend, like, imagine this, we spend like 2 years developing this film. And then we spend all this money. We spend millions. These films are usually, I went and checked, all his films are between 50 to 100 million. The most expensive one was Benjamin Button, which was 120. But it's like usually 50, 60, 50, 60, 70, 50, 60. It's always kind of that ballpark. So they spend like these 50 million, and they work for 2 years. And then his philosophy is like, okay, we're now here. We have the camera rolling. The cheapest part is when the camera is rolling. That's the cheapest part, because we've all got here. We're here now. We should just try to get it to be as best as possible. And obviously, I can disagree as well, because I feel like 50 takes is too much, and it's a bit ridiculous because you don't need that many takes. But it would have been impossible to shoot these shots with the philosophy of David Fincher's filmmaking. It would, because imagine resetting 50 times for blood. You would have to clean the whole car. You would have to replace the clothing. You would have to do all these things. It would have been impossible. This is why sometimes he even does CG food. Sometimes he even does CG stuff where we don't need CG, because there's all these extra takes always happening. And so for those shots, yes, they had to do blood splatters in slow motion in CG because of that. Because it was literally because of the methodology that David Fincher has. And also this shot, the one with the car that you're talking about, with the couple at the beginning, that was also one of the few shots on the film was actually done in film as well, because most of the film is shot with the Viper camera.
The Viper.
Yeah, most of it. But then those shots were actually shot on film, on 35, on high-speed camera, because they weren't getting the enough latitude with the Viper that he wanted for the actual speed of those shots. So this really proves the philosophy of David Fincher. He just uses the best tool for what he needs to do, So sometimes he uses digital, sometimes he uses film, sometimes he uses visual effects, sometimes he uses set. He's one of those people that just, okay, what is the best route to get this? And I think that's why it's such an impressive production, in that sense.
Well, I mean, I think people won't necessarily be startled with how Digital Domain tended to approach those murder blood splatter shots, which is taking the original plates, tracking the characters, match moving them, generating blood, which is generally CG, but I imagine there's practical blood spurts and hits that were used by the compers as well.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's done all the time today and was done prior to this film as well. But they're very effective, those that couple shot and the taxi one. I think the taxi one is fascinating because if you watch the plate of that, even the taxi driver just miming a shotgun to the back of the head looks convincing.
Yeah.
And then you see the final shot. Do you know what I mean? I think I could almost have sold it on the original plate. But anyway, it's incredible. I thought you can see an original plate in one of the breakdowns. I thought that was really convincing.
It was.
Really
It was
awesome.
It was a lot of takes, though. It was a lot of takes to get it to work. Man, they were there for a long time to try to get that. But that's the thing. And also let's mention also something that maybe some people don't know what it is. But there's something called rotomation, which is rotoscoping, but in 3D, where you're basically match moving a full body with a CG body. You know, basically you're tracking by hand the movement of an arm and of a leg, of a head, of everything. And then you basically what you do is you scan the person first, you have a full CG scan of that person, and then you have to basically track by hand, or sometimes not by hand, frame by frame, so that we have a full CG body. And then what you do is you do a projection of the texture that was shot on set against the geometry. This was all novel stuff back then. I know now we have plugins for that and everything is really easy. But back in 2007, this was very new, you know, to project footage into the surface of a piece of geometry so that they could alter the performance, and also they could add blood to the surface of the normals of the CG. So that entire thing, and also not to mention to do the light interaction, because then since they had the geometry, they could put more lights to interact with the thing. But they also had a practical light as well. So this entire shot seems very simple, but it's very groundbreaking on that sense. So I think both that one, I mean, all the murders are like that. They all really rely on rotomation. You have that one, and you have the first one with the couple as well. And also the lake murder, where you basically have the body of the girl being stabbed. It's as well an amazing shot of rotomation. And I need to say that this was, it's funny to see the VFX supervisor talking about this shot. And that shot was the most disturbing shot they had on the set, on the production, you know, because the thing with this is that this is so realistic. They're following so much the crime scenes that it's really hard to see this, because these people really died. You know, she died. She was murdered like that. And we're seeing it full frontal. We're seeing the knife.
The camera's right there.
It's right there,
stabbing.
And it's getting in. It's awful. And they had one of these knives that have it goes in. I can't remember the name of it.
Retractable knife,
exactly, retractable knife. And then of course they had to add the blood, the soaking of the blood on the dress, and also the holes and everything. That shot is really terrifying. The whole thing is terrifying when he comes up there and then starts stabbing them really aggressively. My God, it's really disturbing. But some of the, I know disrespect to any family or any people that died, but it is some of the best tracking and visual effects integrations that I've seen in a long time. Even to this day, it looks absolutely photoreal, doesn't it? Those are fascinating shots. I need to tell you a few things about that lake murder. You know that also not everything was visual effects, of course. You know, they had to do a lot of things like removing graffiti from bridges, and there's a lot of invisible stuff like that, like removing graffiti from bridges, adding buildings, removing buildings. On the background, you always have some kind of trickery going on the matte painting. But they also had a lot of physical things, because that location was the actual location of the murder. Didn't really look like that location anymore. So they had to chopper in trees. They actually put in grass by hand. The set design actually dressed the grass and dressed all those little things, all those little trees and bushes. They're all put in physically, so that it would resemble a bit more the photos from the thing, from the actual crime. and that's also a fascinating piece of work, like that happened on the set dressing as well, which was mind blowing. Yeah, that was like a terrifying shot.
What about some of the wider environments in the show, Hugo? I mean, now we're getting into shots that were also done by Matt World Digital.
Yeah. You're talking about San Francisco, right? San Francisco Bay Area, and also the top taxi, like the God View taxi thing as well. And well, that's a full CG shot, but there's a couple of San Francisco Bay Area shots, the beginning, and also the one with the fireworks as well, which are complete CG. Well, they thought they could actually shoot it for real, and they actually did. They went out and took some cameras and took some long lenses, and they did film the San Francisco Bay Area, but then they kind of felt, this is not going to work because completely different. It doesn't even... It's so different from the 60s and from the 70s. They had no other way but to replicate it almost entirely in CG, matte painting, with water simulations, with all those things, which, again, I know it's quaint these days, but this is 2007. Let's not forget that. That is like a photoreal, full CG shot on full screen on the opening of the shot, of the film. The film opens with that shot. And it almost opens at that shot, and it's really impressive work from Matt World, because it still stands to this day with all the little details, all the little smokes and the little cars going through, the little people and all the little boats everywhere. It's really good. But there's one shot for me takes the prize for the environment, and that is the time-lapse shot, which is the Transamerica building being built, which must be one of the best ways of showing time passing, right? Like I've never really seen, because usually you just see 10 years later. But this thing really being built like this really feels the passing of time, doesn't it? That's an amazing shot.
Yeah, I wanted to talk also about Matt World Digital, which I mean, I think they were responsible for that shot.
They were, they were, yeah.
What they offered around this time was because Craig Barron was one of the heads of the company, they offered a link to the old, which is matte painting and optical work, and how that set itself into environments in any film, and then a link to the new, as you've talked about with projection mapping, 3D environments, and digital matte paintings. So at the time, Matt World Digital had already and was establishing a name for itself as, you need a thing that doesn't exist in your film. You need it to look real. You might need the camera to move, or you might not. Matt World Digital was doing, I would say, specialized shots that sure some other visual effects companies could do, but really filmmakers were tending to turn to Matt World for that kind of work, I think. And here was a perfect time to do it. 1960s, 70s San Francisco, recreating that as if it was really shot there, using projection, as you mentioned. I just love the work they did, and we could probably do a whole nother episode just on their work, Hugo.
I know what you mean. And it's funny because that shot is so realistic, but it's also so fake, because the time lapse is just one day. You just see the sun going through, and then you see the fog, and you see the nighttime. So it's actually just one day, but the way they constructed it, they've built the whole building. It really makes you think a decade has passed. It's so funny how it basically, like, it's a really clever way of showing time but not showing time. And it's very art directed, of course. They had access to the photos of the construction, and so they tried to replicate it really thoroughly, like the way it was constructed, the way the buildings were being constructed, the way the windows were being put. They tried to follow the actual construction methodology so that it would be very accurate to the time period. But you're absolutely right. And it's funny that you say about Matt World being, like, I guess, in the perfect time, the perfect space, and the perfect era, really, to do all these things. But to this day, this is still one of the most used techniques in film. Like, we still to this day have an enormous amount of projection matte painting and an enormous amount of matte painting paint overs on top of CG. Even to this day. Like, this is still a technique that is still cheaper than doing everything in CG. It's still cheaper, and also not that it's cheaper, but from experience, because I do matte painting projections all the time on my productions, and including I'm doing a bunch of them on the Rebellion with the project I'm doing now. Doing paint overs over CG and projection systems allows you to bring in that extra artistry that you have on a matte painter. Because, matte painters and concept artists, they're really masters of light. They're masters of making something beautiful and sometimes not real. So they're not after making it physically accurate. They're after almost like a DOP, making it beautiful for that frame. And so having someone come in and do paint overs like they do on this film, and also how they still do it this day, allows you to have the starting point is the photoreal, physically accurate, light-based system with HDRs and all the correct lighting and everything. But then you have this extra suspense and disbelief on top, which is the little extra rim lights and the little lights here, little neons there, just the little things that make the shot beautiful and aesthetically pleasing. And it's all fake, but you think it's real, because on your mind you're like, oh, I'm sure that's how it looked, but it probably wasn't at all how it looked.
I've often wondered whether, if you came from a certain era of matte painting and environment creation, especially when they were locked off shots that were establishes that sometimes had some live action movement in them, or birds flying or something like that, to give them some movement. But I sometimes wonder if you were a matte painter or environment designer for those kind of shots, you had to capture the essence of reality. Yeah. Because sometimes it can look painterly, especially if we look back at some matte paintings, but painterly on film often looked like a real sequence, a real environment. Yeah. And I wonder whether, Craig Barron and his team, they really captured a lot of the feeling of San Francisco
on
then.
The 60s, yeah.
Some people might say their shots are a bit painterly and a bit stylized, but you could also argue this film is a little bit stylized for 1960s, 70s San Fran. It's real, right? Yeah. Like, that's the whole point we're making. But it's a version of it still, and it's their version of it because they're creating this world.
Well, it's your memory, right? He keeps talking about that on the behind the scenes. Oh, I remember this, I remember that. And you know how your memory is. Your memory is always a memory of something a bit more flashy than what it was. So I think it's almost like we're watching the memories of this director and not really the real photos of the places. Although they did follow, attention to detail is huge on this film. I remember looking at the behind the scenes where they're talking about the set of the newspaper, and they were talking about that at the back of the shot, there's like some newspaper stacked. And if you were on set and you go to the stack of newspapers and you open a newspaper, they would be full replicas of the newspapers at the time, every page printed. And those were never used on the film even. But so the attention to detail is really remarkable, and I'm sure this time-lapse shot is photoreal and it is looking like it was back then, but it has, like you say, it has this kind of extra, almost like this extra dream on top of it. It has this like extra creativity on top that makes it so compelling, I think that's why it's beautiful.
It is a bit dreamlike, the film, really, in a way. It's like as if I've always thought it was kind of like someone's recollection of the murders.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Like, someone talking about something that someone else talked about and someone else talked about it. We always have that on the film. Like, this guy saw this and this guy saw that. But then it's always like secondhand accounts of something else.
Like, not a documentary, but something else. Look, the dreamlike quality comes across in that Golden Gate Bridge shot as well, which is sort of at an impossible angle that, I'm sure you could get a camera crew up on the archway.
It's so funny.
But, that's another example of a dreamlike shot, which is so compelling.
So it's funny because that shot started as the poster of the film. So Matt World was hired by Warner Bros. To do the poster of the film. And then, for some reason, David Fincher liked it so much that he asked, okay, can we actually have it on the film? And it really works really well, because that is the moment when Jack, when he drives up north and he's actually trying to find the murderer, and he's actually interviewing people because he got all these leads from the police, but the police couldn't do anything about it. That's like a journey, and he's going for a journey. He's going head north, and then you see this shot of the car going north, and the camera is going from top to bottom, exactly telling, okay, this is the beginning of a journey. It's such an interesting choice of having that top perspective, very wide, going down, just explaining to you, okay, they're going to go up down north, and he's going to go and try to find something mysterious. Then you have all this mist and all this mysterious feeling in it, which is really exaggerated, but also I've seen photos of this bridge with this mist. So it feels exaggerated, but it also feels real because I've seen it before, but also I haven't seen it before. It's so fascinating how this shot is made. I love that shot. I really like that shot. Yeah,
it's fantastic.
Yeah.
I'm curious about this film leading into other David Fincher work.
Yeah.
But I don't want to leave this film just yet, Hugo, unless there's anything else you were dying to mention about it.
Well, I will just say...
Often there is.
Yeah. I would say that obviously we could spend a long time. I don't want to spend much more time on it because I want to talk about other things, but there's a couple of other things that probably people don't even know about, which is really interesting, I feel. For example, there's a lot of moments on this film where you see close-ups of the letters, and in close-ups of the text and everything, and all of those are motion control shots, which is really, really impressive. They're actually done with a Cooper Control animation stand, and they were done by the VFX team. It took them 3 days to shoot all this thing, and on top of that, and they're all, of course, highly processed as well, and a lot of visual effects on it as well. They're beautiful shots, the way that it's so precise, showing the letters and the typography. But also you have every moment that Jack Gyllenhaal is actually drawing something, because he draws a lot on this film and he actually writes a lot on this film. It's actually a double, because obviously he can't draw this good and he can't write this good. So we have a stand-in. And it's so funny because that is the visual effects as well. And I think it's a good segue to the next film, because the knuckles of this stunt they didn't look the same as Jack Gyllenhaal's knuckles, and also he was more hairy than Jack as well. So they had to do extensive cleanup and actually beautification and utification on this shot for the knuckles, so that it would look more like Jack and less like the stunt guy. And it's so fascinating because this is 2007. We haven't obviously, a lot of flame work was doing these things back then. A lot of beautification was happening in commercials, and I think that's David Fincher's world, really, from commercials and music videos. But this was really... I don't think films were doing these things just yet, so much of going to a process of actually changing the individual... we had films where you had 1 or 2 shots, but this is a lot of shots where we see his hands, This is a lot of work here. And it really, for me, there's a lot of other visual effects on this film, but for me it really leads up to the next film we want to talk about, which has so much beautification, doesn't it? I think that's kind of the segue I wanted to try to get into.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the next big film that Fincher made was The Curious Case of Benjamin Button. Obviously a huge collaboration, again, with Digital Domain and visual effects supervisor Eric Barber.
Yeah. 1 year later, just 1 year later, which is really, really impressive for these films to come out back to back almost,
Yeah, it was impressive. Fincher also worked with Lola on Curious Case, and probably started a relationship there, because Lola did de-aging and some aging work.
Yeah.
But I mean, you and I had a debate about this film before we started, Hugo, Curious Case, saying, is this an invisible effects film? Where I know. I've said, of course it is. If you don't know that Brad Pitt is CG for a lot of this, you won't. I don't think you'll realise.
I know.
I think
I know.
you're suggesting that maybe with the passage of time it's quite obvious. But, I mean, even me in 2008, just getting into visual effects journalism there are some scenes of old Brad Pitt's character as a completely CG head, at least, that I think were utterly convincing and invisible in that way.
I know what you mean. I know what you mean. And no disrespect to the work that the people have done that, because it is groundbreaking work. You know, I felt that it's one of the most impressive projects at the time. I just feel like it's not like Zodiac. That's the thing. The reason I mention this is because on Zodiac, you have invisible stuff. Like there's two people talking, and then the entire background is like CG and other things and matte paintings, and it's just two people talking. And I feel like it's a completely period piece, a period film. You don't even think about it. On here, though, on Benjamin Button, you know that there's visual effects. Even people that might not be completely into the visual effects, they probably will know, because they notice that Brad Pitt doesn't look like this, you know. Brad Pitt doesn't look this young, and Brad Pitt couldn't look old. And you see Brad Pitt on those performances, you still see it on the face of the old guy, or sorry, the young guy, I guess, the young guy, old guy. So that's in that sense, that's why I meant it wasn't any visual effect, because I think that film is a complete visual effects. But I understand your point of view, because when you think about the utification, the younger versions, when you think about the Chelsea boat, when you think about the actual Brad Pitt, and also the Paris CG matte paintings, and the CG trains in New Orleans, and the New York vistas, it looks like Zodiac. It's the same technique, it's the same approach. I know what you mean.
Look, it's not an invisible effects film because there's so many visual effects in there, and they had to do it. I mean, they could have done old Brad Pitt with makeup. I guess what I mean, it does depend on your definition of invisible effects.
I guess
if
so,
there is one.
I guess so. No, there isn't one, though, right? There isn't one, no, isn't it? That's the thing.
No, because you could argue that the train sequence, the bus sequence in Shang-Chi, is an invisible effect sequence.
I know.
Because you can imagine part of that could be shot in San Francisco. I mean, which it was, but that's why we're having this discussion, because I think for me, that's why I wanted to call this key podcast David Fincher and the rise of invisible visual effects, because I feel like the rise has happened and now everything is invisible. But I feel like his films were a catalyst for this. It was kind of like, not a starting point, because a lot of other people were doing it, but the methodology, the way he works, you know, the way every shot is visual effects, and also we have like 3-minute long shots. That is new, and that's where I think that's why I called it a visual effect, because he's still doing it this day. Like Monk is like that. Monk is full with invisible visual effects. So these days we can't really talk about that anymore. But I feel like these were people on the top of their game. Like there was no one else doing this. Like this full CG Brad Pitt. There was no other film that looked this real, this good. No, you know. So I suppose coming back to the invisible effects thing, this is the other thing that I was going to mention, it's that the camera work, the scenes are just normal scenes.
Yeah, exactly.
Like two characters having a conversation or peering over a door. It's not fast whips, pans. It's not It's not a superhero thing. So in many ways, Digital Domain and Lola and I think Asylum did some visual effects in the film.
They did,
They had nowhere to hide.
Yeah.
And often that's the hallmark of an invisible effects shot or sequence.
Exactly. That's why I'm so glad you mentioned this. That is why I wanted to do this episode, because this is David Fincher. David Fincher is like this. He's not looking to do a VFX shot. He's just doing a shot. He's just, Brad Pitt is old and he's talking. It's probably on the script, like, older Brad Pitt talks. That's the only thing it says, you know? And then he's talking for 2 minutes. And, hope for the best. Let's just do the tracking now and do the CG shot. there's nowhere to hide. You don't have motion blur to hide. You don't have fast-paced action to hide. You don't have sparks. You don't have explosions. You don't have smoke. You don't have camera shakes. You don't have fights. You don't have really fast-cutting editing. You don't have anything to hide. And I think that's why it becomes an visual effects, so invisible visual effects. And this is the hallmark of this director. Because, man, come on. Look at... I know he did that on Fight Club and on Seven, but it was less. You know, like it was... He was still, especially Panic Room, he was still kind of growing into it, so he had all these really crazy camera moves. But now he's finessed this as an art. Just look at Gone Girl, look at Dragon Tattoo. My God, it's like you don't even know. Maybe it is a VFX, maybe not. I don't know. Like, and then you look at the VFX breakdowns, like, oh, okay, that was a VFX, or then, oh shit, that was actually not a VFX. He's now perfected this thing. His films are now seamless. Like there's nothing.
Yes, I would. Yeah, you know? I would go as far as to say that on this kind of podcast, we are calling out visual effects shots. I almost feel like David Fincher and his team they don't want shots to be called out as VFX shots. So any shot just needs to work in their cut.
Yeah.
And they'll do anything they need to do. If it needs a CG girl on a CG motorbike to crash, or even just to go over a bridge, they'll do it. If they need to re-edit a scene and use the Avid or Premiere or some editing tool to do the visual effects shot, they'll do it. And in fact, in recent times, I feel like that's what Fincher and his editor and VFX people are doing.
Yeah,
they're doing crazy amounts of visual effects, but just in editorial.
Yeah.
Or, you know, just in head replacements and, you know, splicing things and split screens, which we 20 years ago would say that's huge in visual effects work. And now it's just part of his process, right?
Yeah, and I think that's why I was mentioning that I feel like he's the closest to Stanley Kubrick, probably also Christopher Nolan as well, but because this is exactly the Kubrick method, you know, like this is the Kubrick method, like anything we can do to achieve this shot. It doesn't matter how we're going to do it. We're just going to go for it. And that's how he would do it, by building the entire hotel of The Shining. Or obviously back then, Kubrick didn't have visual effects to help him. But I really consider if Kubrick was still alive today, he's been dead for 21 years, unfortunately, but if he was still alive today, he would be all in on VFX. I am absolutely certain you would be doing exactly like what David Fincher is doing now, because it's basically the methodology of doing, okay, we're doing a film, and any technique that can help to do the shot, we're going to do it. I don't think, a lot of people criticize David Fincher that he abuses too much visual effects, and he does too much, and he does too many takes, and he does too many. I don't think any of that is relevant. I feel like he just does whatever needs to be done for the story to be told. And I think that is why it's so impressive. That's why it's invisible, because he's not really talking about it. And he's like, okay, we did this shot. And obviously, if you look at the behind the scenes, and you need to the DVDs, the Blu-rays, they're amazing. They have so much. Like, man, the Benjamin Button's Blu-ray has a 3 hours and 45 minutes long documentary. The documentary is bigger than the film. And this documentary goes through every process, from concept art to storyboard to the shoot, second unit, to the production design, visual effects, the audio, even the sound effects. It's like a workshop. It's like, I couldn't believe when I watched this back in 2008. Fortunately, these things don't happen anymore, because, for example, when you look at Gone Girl doesn't even have, Gone Girl's Blu-ray doesn't even only has a commentary. It doesn't have anything else. So we're now, unfortunately, having less of this, and I think it's also because studios are probably not really keen on showing, and they're probably more keen to keep the mystery of things alive.
Yeah.
But in the past, David Fincher was, I think, the director that has shown more stuff. If you look at all these Blu-rays, he really shows everything. It's like filmmaking 101, and I love his films because of that. Sometimes they're not the best. I mean, I can agree that we didn't talk about that in the beginning, but I can think that Zodiac is not the best film. I mean, it's a good film. I feel like it's a bit long and it's hard to sometimes watch, but I can get it. I get it. And I have to give the hats to him, because he's one of the most interesting directors alive right now, because the work he's doing is so different. And I know this is a visual effects podcast, not a filmmaking podcast, but even from a visual effects point of view, every time he does a film, it's groundbreaking. Look at Mank. Mank's visual effects are groundbreaking. Again, Dragon Tattoo was as well. I'm sure his next film is going to be groundbreaking again. He's pushing the envelope to a point that the shots are becoming so seamless that become references for other productions. You know, like, we know that for a long time, Benjamin Button, to go back to that film, was a reference for CG doubles. I mean, that was the best that we could see at the time. We even see the animation director from Digital Domain. Forgive me, I can't remember his name now, but we even see him talking about that on the Blu-ray, saying, this was so hard that I even wanted to quit 5 times. You know, he said that on the Blu-ray, like, this was so difficult to do at the time in 2008 that I just wanted to quit. And so this is like pushing, it's no compromise, I guess. It's like, okay, we're going to go for real, and that's it. Like, if it's not real, we usually see the notes on the dailies from David Fincher. Sometimes when he doesn't like a shot, he just says, what is this shit? Like, he's really taking it to another level where, okay, it has to be pixel perfect, and that's it.
Yeah, and maybe the extension of that, Hugo, is that in the right hands, i.e. Fincher's hands, the visual effects were used sparingly and appropriately.
Yeah.
You could argue that Digital Domain had so much success with their digital Brad Pitt in Curious Case that clearly some other filmmakers and Digital Domain itself wanted to push, digital humans, and every subsequent film has remained tricky.
Yeah.
And it just depends on the film,
the
actor, the director, the setting. Benjamin Button was in it's always in a hazy, smoky room, dark New Orleans thing. It suits subtle, slow shots.
Yeah.
Tron Legacy, which is this other film I'm mentioning with other digital humans later, didn't have the same kind of shot design, so it's different. And I'm comparing things there, but I do mean that Fincher had a certain way of making these films and using visual effects to do it.
Yeah.
Look at also Social Network.
Yeah.
This is a film with a huge amount of visual effects in it, but rarely gets talked about for its visual effects, except for maybe the twinning work.
Yeah. Which is also
which is incredible.
Which is incredible. And that actor, it's so funny, but because that actor was not even famous at the time. And so everyone just assumed it was twins because they didn't know him. Obviously, Armie Hammer now, like, he's really famous now. He's like super famous. And obviously now everyone watching back, like, there's 2 of them. But back then...
Yeah, he's famous in a bad way, isn't he?
I know. Well, what I mean is, like, he became really famous with the Oscar nomination because of that film, the Call Me By Your Name, and then, I know, now he's from the bad way, but there was a time that he became really famous on that film he wasn't, like... But I think David Fincher talks about this on some of these interviews, on a really good book, like, it's this book here, which is called Interviews. Sorry, it's actually just called Interviews. He talks about these things where, on Benjamin Button, for example, the fact that it was Brad Pitt really helped the film because everyone knows how Brad Pitt looks like. So even on the minute performance of Brad Pitt inside the young man, you could see, oh shit, it's Brad Pitt. It's Brad Pitt. It really helped because, as he states on the interview, the entire world knows how Brad Pitt looks like. I mean, at least the Western world. Everyone looking around in 2000, he was one of the most famous people on Earth. And exactly the opposite happened on Social Network, where by not knowing who this guy is, it really sold the visual effect because you're kind of, oh yeah, it's a twin. They cast twins because they do look slightly different, so you're thinking, oh yeah, they're probably twins. And they have different clothing, different ways of acting and everything. So he also plays with this. The casting is so crucial for this as well.
You could argue, that Mank Gone Girl, Dragon Tattoo, there's a story that needs to be told.
Yeah.
There's shots that need to be in the film. You have to come up with a way of making them. And he just approaches it from perfection point of view.
Yeah.
I mean, every director wants to, right?
I know,
it's
but
it's not unusual that way.
I know, but he gets
But
it.
I think that
Yeah. But he arrives to it because I guess he's persistent. I know, and his films are not that expensive. You think about it, like if you think about the level that they make, and I feel like at this stage the studios really trust him because I was looking at a really interesting thing here, which is obviously directors get greenlit if they can actually at least get the money back, and so he's never lost any money on any film so far. And to a point, actually, if you, I know this is silly, but on Wikipedia they have this. If you sum up all of the costs of all of his films so far, 9 films, I believe, that was like $650 million that he spent on all these films. But he has made a profit of $2 billion. So he's very bankable. And I guess it really tells, it's a bit like Christopher Nolan. I'm assuming the studio is like, okay, here's the check and you go and do your thing. And it must be the non-interference that makes this work, because he has total control in director's cut on everything. And so you feel that, okay, when you reach that level, like Kubrick did, and like Hitchcock did as well, you then reach a level where you're trusted, your films do money, they give the money back at least, and they still give profit. So they're not going to interfere. And if they're not going to interfere, then he's really going to accomplish what he was set out to do. Sometimes they're not as good. Like, I don't really like Gone Girl. I don't think it's a very good film. I don't really enjoyed it as much as I did. But I can really definitely look at the artistry behind it. I'm like, wow, this is clinical. Maybe too clinical. Maybe Gone Girl is a bit too much. Maybe it's too David Finchery to my taste, because I think he's getting more and more clinical and more clean as the years go by. And I am still very interested on the looseness that you have on Seven, Fight Club, and even Zodiac a bit. And I feel like he's losing that looseness a bit. I think he's getting a bit too constrained, and maybe it's because he's getting older. He's now 60, so he's probably getting a bit older, and he wants to do things a bit more clinical, and he's getting maybe a bit out of hand. I don't know. I have never talked with him, but I feel like I feel like Gone Girl is maybe a step too far for me, but do you know what I mean? Like, it's so clinical. It's so clinical. It's almost like a.
But the book is clinical.
I don't know. I haven't read the book.
If you hadn't read the book,
no, I haven't. No. I'll be honest.
All of it is a big, huge surprise, and probably had to be told that way. To come across like that. But remember, Fincher isn't just making feature films. He's done some pretty amazing stuff with television as well, which also tends to use some of these invisible effects we're talking about.
It does, yeah.
Particularly the editorial side of the visual effects, which I think is fascinating. Again, a whole different discussion.
Yeah.
And so what I like about Fincher is that he isn't just now a feature filmmaker. He obviously does everything. Music videos from years gone by, the feature films, and then House of Cards and Mindhunter. And
Mindhunter has the same level of visual effects as Zodiac almost. And I feel like it's the same kind of thing as well, same kind of philosophy. I'll be honest, like, I think David Fincher, he is doing an amazing job, and I really love his films, and I really like and enjoy to see the craftsman and the artistry behind it. But I do still prefer his earlier work, and I do still prefer the more grungy version of David Fincher, where you could see the flaws as well. I really like Seven because of that, and I really love Fight Club because of those things, because it has a lot of limitations, and I feel like I'm always a bit afraid of people that have no limits. And when you don't have limitations from the studio, or limitations of budget, or limitations of time, as he now has, because now he does 50 takes, 70 takes, 100 takes, I think it's a problem. It starts to become a problem, and I hope it doesn't. I hope he can come back to a better form. I feel like sometimes his films are losing some of the charm that they had when it was earlier, but we're talking about just the visual effects, and I feel like Mindhunter is actually one of the best films, not a film, it's a TV show, that is made in recent years, because it's so good, isn't it? It's so good. Not just the visual effects, but the show itself is such a good show. I know it
scares me.
It
scares me. It's so good.
I know it is, isn't it? House of Cards was already very good, and obviously I know House of Cards kind of, pardon the pun, it fell like a House of Cards really at the end. It did, and that was of course because of Kevin Spacey and because of all those problems. Because obviously the show was not supposed to end like that, so it kind of fallen apart at the end. But if you look at season 1 and season 2, my God, House of Cards is also like a clinically well-made TV show. I guess David Fincher's methodology and perfectionism probably is more suited for TV shows anyway, because if you think about Zodiac is almost 3 hours long, Benjamin Button is 3 hours long, Monk is almost 3 hours long, all of his films are almost 3 hours long. He's always struggling to cut them. The first cut of Zodiac was 4 hours, he always struggles to try to keep it below 3 hours, or in between 3 hours and 2 hours and 45. I guess on Mindhunter, that's not an issue anymore, because now you have 8 episodes. You can make it 5 hours. You can make it 7 hours. I kind of see that maybe David Fincher should just focus on TV, because he has the time to grow and he has the time to develop something as good as House of Cards and as good as Mindhunter. I don't know if there's going to be a season 3, but Mindhunter is just a fascinating show. It is. From the visual effects point of view, like you said, but also from a cinematography point of view. The actors also are really good as well. It's a really nice period TV show. I feel like a bit under the radar, right? Like I don't see a lot of people talking about season 2. And it wasn't even like awarded that much on the award seasons, but I think it's great. I love it.
It's a bit of a slow burn. It's not your typical streaming show.
It's like the Zodiac.
But yeah.
It's like
going back to one quick thing you said, I think, I don't think David Fincher or any filmmaker has carte blanche to do whatever they want. They might be a box office success, but I think that he would always find that he's got restrictions.
Of course.
He's a veteran. He makes films, many of them, and TV shows, and he's a perfectionist, clearly. And I was hanging out for his World War Z sequel, because I just thought that was such a great match-up with him and Brad Pitt.
It was, yeah. And the first film was actually the first film was actually very fascinating. I really liked that film, actually. And I thought it was going to be great to have a sequel on that film, because I really want to know more of what happened. I really want to know more. So I know what you mean. I didn't mean to say that he has carte blanche. Of course he doesn't. Not even Christopher Nolan, not even Kubrick had it. But what I mean is, like, he gets away with a lot of things that directors would not get away. That's what I mean. Like, he gets away with all the long takes. He gets away with having more money for visual effects on a period film. He gets away with all these things because he is like these big... David Fincher is going to be those directors like Kubrick and like Fellini and like Hitchcock, which is going to be talked about on schools for decades to come, even after he's dead. And those are the kind of directors that the studios want to have on their portfolio, because the studios then know that DVD, that Blu-ray will sell forever. The streaming version will sell forever. It is going to be a test of time. The film will stick around forever. There will be books about the film. There will be documentaries about the film. You will be known as one of the biggest filmmakers of the 20th and 21st century. So I feel like they're on another level, because the studios know that, yes, maybe we won't get all the money now, but on the long run, we're going to get all the money, because it is going to stay for, like, look at Kubrick. Like, his films still sell. There's still Blu-ray. Even now, a 4K version came out, and Warner Bros. Is banking on it again. There's exhibitions, there's books, there's this, there's that. It just keeps doing royalties. And I know it's a slow burn, but those are the directors that stay, and everyone knows, oh, man, Kubrick, yeah, he was on Warner Bros. It's a huge thing for Warner Bros. To know that they have that director or have this director. That's why it was a big deal that Nolan left Warner Bros. Like that. That was a big deal. So I think these studios really want to keep these stars, because he's like a star. He's like famous. Even you know that a director is famous when even like normal people from outside the filmmaking industry, they know his name. Like it's a bit like everyone knows who Spielberg is, even my mother. And David Fincher is not exactly at that level. Maybe my mother doesn't know who David Fincher is, but most people know who David Fincher is. You know what I mean? So it starts to become bigger than the stars themselves. It's like, oh yeah, have you watched the latest David Fincher film? So it's not like, oh, have you watched the latest Brad Pitt film? It's not like that, you know? I think that's where the studios, that's why I think he has more carte blanche than other directors, you know?
Well, I think we should wrap up our love affair with David Fincher there, and reach out to him and ask him to make the World War Z sequel.
Oh man, you like that film as well, don't you? Like, I really like that film.
I think they did an amazing job of that film, given what apparently went on.
Yeah.
With completely changing the third act and other things, and I just love where it could go.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure that it is happening. But I will watch anything David Fincher makes, and I'm glad to have talked about it with you, Hugo. So thank you so much.
Thanks, man. It was great. It was great to talk about one of my favorite directors, and I really, really recommend everyone to go and get these Blu-rays because they're really cheap on the bargain bin, and they have hours of behind the scenes which you cannot find anywhere. You cannot find these things anywhere. Like, it's not on YouTube. It's nowhere to be found. Obviously, there's a bunch of Cinefex as well. Cinefex 116 is all about Benjamin Button. And then, of course, you have Cinefex 109, which is all about Zodiac and other stuff, as you can see on the cover. Other films that didn't went to the test of time. But there's also
what are you saying about Ghost Rider?
Also, I would recommend this book. Is a beautiful book about Benjamin Button. It's the making of as well. As you can see, it's a very big book. Really, really big photos. I'll put some of them on the video. As always, don't forget that I am making a video version of this podcast, which I will put some photos and some stills and some behind the scenes of what I can find. So that you can kind of watch the beautiful films while we're talking about them. Yeah.
Awesome. And Hugo, we always finish off with just letting everyone know where to find us. Where's the best place for you?
For me, it's just Hugo's Desk. So if you can go to Hugo's Desk on YouTube, I have 2 channels, Hugo's Desk and Hugo's Desk Live. 2 YouTube channels, and then of course I have a Patreon. Don't forget, if you like this show and if you like to support our podcast, don't forget to support us on Patreon. Both I have a Patreon, Ian also has a Patreon. I also have a membership system on my YouTube channel as well, if you want to become a member and support the show. And don't forget to subscribe and do a review so that we can bump up on the ratings on the Apple Podcast. Go for it. Press those buttons, put those 5 stars, go for it. Give us a 5-star review.
Go for it. Awesome. Don't forget to check out beforesandafters.com, and I am on Twitter at Ian Fales. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Thank you, Hugo. That was great.
It was great. Thank you so much. Bye.
See ya. Bye.